Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hayward Crawford. Welcome to another episode of the Career Pulse podcast, your vital sign for career and business from everyday go-getters like you. I am a filmmaker, financial coach, and content producer, and I'm excited for our new guest on this episode. Our new guest today is Maya Shwayder. Maya Shwayder, she's a journalist and broadcaster currently based in Berlin. She grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan, and attended Harvard University. While there, she joined the editorial board of the school paper, the Harvard Crimson. While writing for the Crimson, one of her articles was actually won an award from the Society of Professional Journalists. After graduating from Harvard, Maya went to Columbia Journalism School in New York. Her master thesis about domestic abuse in the LGBT communities won her honors and was published in The Atlantic. She worked as the UN and the New York correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, as well as freelance for publications such as Variety and the Daily Beast, and briefly worked at Facebook before moving to Germany to join the Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster. I hope I said that right. In 2016, she joined the on-air coverage of the U.S. elections, and in 2017 joined the DW's Washington Bureau before moving back to Berlin to begin anchoring the news. And what I really like about Maya's interview is, she really just goes into just the in-depth of her path on her early career in theater and how it led to, her discovered path of journalism, kind of, navigating the terrain. And, she not only speaks fluent German, but also, some Italian and German as well. So it was really interesting doing this interview. We actually called her, it's like a 7-hour time difference. So we had to do the interview a little bit earlier. But I really appreciated a lot of her takeaways, and a lot of it had to do with just, really standing up for what you believe in and just really the mental toughness, going through different adversities, different challenges, and lessons you take away from it. And we talk a lot about the turning, the turning landscape of the journalism industry. Her take on fake news and mobile reporting, and how people nowadays they really seek media that more so may gratify their opinion versus challenging it, and what her take is on those type of things. We also dove into just some time management hacks and just different things that she does to put her day together, and what are things she takes away from different industries to apply toward her craft. And also even the importance of making sure you sleep, putting the phone down. A lot of that we kind of dive deep into, and to really see how she's able to, being in a newsroom for long hours and going through a lot of these different things, what are ways she does to stay mentally ready and mentally prepared. So for those of you guys that may be looking for different hacks on that, that's what we discuss as well. And also, really good takeaways when it comes to just overall, standing for something, having a purpose, knowing to treat everybody with respect, knowing to stay on top of your game, and always stay with what's going on. So I really enjoyed this podcast. It was very interesting doing my first international call overseas to a guest. So once again, hope you enjoyed this podcast with the one and only Maya Shwayder. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Career Pulse podcast, your vital sign for career and business from everyday go-getters like you. My name is Hayward Crawford, your host. I am a filmmaker, financial coach, and content producer. I am here with the one and only Maya Shwayder. Maya, how you doing this morning?
I am great. How are you?
Good. Glad we were able to catch you. I know we had a little bit of scheduling trouble, and for a second there, trying to get a call from you from Germany. We had to switch over to Skype.
Yep. We're all very busy and important here,
yeah,
aren't we?
Yeah, thank God for Skype. So I just want to go ahead and dive on in. I'm glad to have you on. So Maya, what do you typically tell people when they ask you what you do?
Well, first thing I usually say is I'm a journalist, just straight up, because I've worked in several different forms of journalism before landing where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say I'm a journalist, and then the conversation will go either one of two ways. They'll either ask what I cover, or they'll ask who I work for. One of those is easier to answer than the other. I currently work for the German international broadcaster Deutsche Welle, which is actually available in the U.S. under the title DW News. So you can watch us if you want.
Okay.
But the answer of what I cover is much more difficult to respond to, because we really do sort of just top of the news general coverage at DW, and I don't yet have a specific beat. So it really varies day to day when I go into the office what I'm going to be writing about or producing video about. One day I'm talking about Greek-Turkish relations. The next day I'm putting together a whole history of the city of Jerusalem, and it does revolve a lot around global politics, but we also do coverage of Earth Day, the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King that's coming up, I think in a couple of weeks, or next week possibly, from when we're recording this. So every day is different, and it's actually somewhat of a difficult question for me to answer.
Okay, well, yeah, a lot of different ways, like you said. So tell us, Maya, about some of your early beginnings growing up and what may have led to your path in journalism to where you are now. Yeah.
So I was always two things. I was always a writer, even from a very young age. In elementary school, I always loved the writing assignments. And I was always, to put it bluntly, I was always somewhat of a show-off. I always loved performing. I think you probably remember, Hayward, in high school, I was definitely one of the theater kids.
Yep, I remember.
And, dance and music and musical theater. I studied opera very seriously for a while. And pretty seriously thought about trying to pursue a career in music and in performance. And in various ways, shapes, and forms, I was shown that wasn't really gonna be a viable option for me. I was always one of those kids who was good, but not good enough to really be able to make a career out of it, or at least that's sort of what I was told through various, auditioning for college, and when I was in college trying to get various roles in different productions, and it was still something that I loved, but it just wasn't working out for me in the same way that it had been in high school and before.
Okay.
So after actually taking a year off from college to sort of do some soul searching and figure out what I wanted, I landed back on writing. And I decided that, where I went to school, when you were a writer, one of the things you did was you joined the school paper. It was just sort of the thing that you did. So I joined the editorial board of my school paper and ended up really loving it.
Awesome.
Much more than I anticipated. And so started doing a couple of internships here and there, and it sort of kept working out for me in a way that theater hadn't. Theater, I always felt like there were a bunch of roadblocks being thrown up in my way. In journalism, it was like the path sort of laid itself out for me in one way or another.
So you found a lot more open roads. It felt like the journalism path, versus theater.
Exactly. And so I just sort of kept walking down that road, and applied to grad school for journalism just sort of on a whim to see if I could even get accepted, and got accepted to Columbia. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go to grad school now.
Yeah.
Had a great time at Columbia, got honors on my master's thesis, and then managed to just sort of keep myself afloat as a journalist in New York for a while. Wasn't really reaching great heights in New York because that's a really competitive media field there.
Yeah, dog eat dog.
Very dog eats dog, very based on, your social media presence and how aggressive you are with networking. And then this opportunity came up to move to Germany and pursue what I saw as a marriage between my journalism path and my previous love of theater and performance, which would be broadcast journalism.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So what I do now is really a great, like I said, a great marriage of the two, and it's brought out a lot of the old talents and the old love that I have for being in front of people and telling them a story.
Yeah, so it's interesting how you relate broadcasting to to performance. So I
Yeah,
seen
there's a
yeah.
lot of aspect. I mean, of course, in journalism, you're never telling fiction. You're never, your
Mm-hmm.
goal is never to spread lies and never to do harm. It's just to, stick to the facts and tell the truth as best you can discover it. But there is a lot of aspect of wrapping those true life stories in a way that the audience can relate to and that will capture them and make them pay attention and learn something
Mm-hmm.
about their world, about what's going on around them, about the way their democracy works. There's a real talent to and an art form, I would say, in how you best present these stories to the world.
Mm. It's a really good point. Now, what would you say? What does the day in the life of Maya Shwayder look like from the time you wake up until you go to bed?
That is actually a hard question for me to answer because it's different every single day. The place where I work, we don't have what I think of as a traditional sort of 9 to 5 structure of the day.
Mm-hmm.
My experience of working in the American journalism field was basically you're just on 24/7. And especially for a while, I was freelancing for a paper that is based in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So my days were very, very skewed when I was in New York because I'd have to be up at 6 a.m. and then my day would basically be over by like 3, 4 p.m. because that's when the paper would go to print in Israel. But then I would still have to be out and going to events and networking and doing interviews. And so my days in New York were, ridiculously long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and here in Germany, it really depends on what shift I'm scheduled for that day because our newsroom works in shifts.
Oh,
So
okay.
we have, early shift, afternoon, evening shift, and overnight shift. So I work a lot of sort of evenings and afternoons most of the time. And what that means is I get to sleep in, which is lovely.
Nice. Okay.
So I'll wake up, 10, 11, check the news, run whatever errands I have to run for the day, and then I'll go to work around like 1, 2, 3 p.m. or so, depending on what shift I have or what time it starts. And then I'm there in the newsroom, basically glued to my computer
Mm-hmm.
until my shift is over 8.5 hours later, which could be midnight, 1, 2 a.m., just sort of staying on top of the news from around the world that's rolling in. So the thing about working at an international broadcaster is,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we do American news, and the U.S. and U.S. politics is a big focal point for us. But we also do a lot of coverage of the EU and Brexit, and we have stories from, the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar and elections that are happening all over Africa, and coverage of dictators stepping down after years of pressure from inside their parties, and covering stories that don't otherwise get a lot of notice elsewhere in
Mm-hmm.
the world. So that's something that I credit us a lot for.
Okay.
But the day also depends a lot on what news comes up because there are definitely slow news days. That
Mm-hmm.
happens, a lot. There, you sort of have to think about, okay, no big political earthquakes have happened. No one's been fired from the Trump administration
Mm-hmm.
today.
Right.
There are no elections happening. Thank God, no natural disasters have swept in. So what are we going to talk about today? And those are the days when you focus on sort of the smaller things. There's this interesting, social change happening in this country over here, or there's this, funny, quirky story happening over here.
Mm-hmm.
That you just sort of have to search through the wires a little bit more to find, or you call people to say, hey, do you know of something? You call your correspondents and figure out what's happening. And then my day will also depend on whether I am working that day as a reporter in the newsroom or as an anchor. Those are the two roles that I fill.
Oh,
So
okay.
if I'm a reporter, then it's a little bit more relaxed because I'm sort of dependent on other people to tell me, hey, we need a story on this, or we need a story on that, or we need to update this or that was done earlier in the day. And then I'm working a lot with video and video editing and just putting together, like I said, putting together a story in a way that will that is, completely factually accurate and tells 100% of the story as we know it, but also will be presented in such a way that the audience can relate to it and wants to know more.
Okay.
So that's the reporter side. And on the anchor side, which is what I'm doing yesterday and today and also this coming weekend, that draws a lot more on my theater background. So, it's much more about how I look. I genuinely have to worry a lot about what my hair and what my skin look like that day. I have to dress myself very carefully. We have a wardrobe woman who I work with. I spend, half an hour to 40 minutes in makeup, trying to talk to the makeup woman in German about what I want to look like and make sure that I don't look either too bland or too much like a Las Vegas showgirl. And then I have to read into every single story that we're covering that day and make sure that I know the story inside and out so that I can affect the right emotion as is appropriate for the story, because I don't want to be looking happy and joyous accidentally when I'm talking about people being killed in an earthquake.
Yeah.
And I also don't want
So are there
be...
like cues on the teleprompter, like for those mannerisms, or just
Not at
for
all.
that, or...
No, it's totally up to me. There are no stage directions at all. It's just the script as I have to read it, and it's up to me to properly get the story across and not mess that up with
Right.
is something that you have to struggle with, because there's news that breaks, or the order of the show gets changed, or we'll have an interview scheduled and the person cancels at the last minute, or we're in the middle of an interview and we lose the signal for the person we're talking to, so you have to fill more time, and so stuff comes driving at you.
Yeah, it's almost like a theater stage. A lot of performing, a lot of
yeah, exactly. To be able to change on a dime and be convincing in it,
adjusting to the situation.
Yeah, so it's a high intense. It's like I would say the reporter job is more like a marathon, because you're on for those 8 hours and you have to pace yourself in terms of what you're doing. And the anchor job is more like a sprinter. You have these 15-minute to half-hour chunks. We do also have hour shows, although I haven't graduated to doing that yet. 15 minutes to half an hour where you got to be on, like 100% on, no breaks whatsoever. And then you get like a 45-minute to half-hour break after that, where you sort of have to regroup and breathe and make sure you still know what's coming up for the next show at the top of the next hour.
Ooh, it's intense.
Yeah, it can be.
Sounds really intense. Now, what? Now, I'm just curious. I don't know if I'm going a little left field here, but you mentioned, doing work in Israel, Germany. How many languages exactly are you fluent in?
My usual answer to this is just one, English. But I also, I do work in the language of the office is German. So I do speak, I would say, pretty competent German.
Okay.
I'm not fluent. I do make a lot of mistakes, but I can get the point across that I need to get across. And then I also studied, like I said, I studied opera very seriously. So I speak Italian as well. Oh, and I actually have my minor in college was actually Italian literature and language. So it's been a minute since I tried to speak Italian, but it's still in there somewhere. And then I also I can do some French and some Spanish if I really am pressed to do so.
So, like with your working in Israel, what's the native language there?
That is Hebrew, but I was working for that newspaper in New York, and it's an English language newspaper.
Oh, okay.
So I very rarely had to bust out any very rusty Hebrew that I learned at a very young age.
Gotcha. So tell us, Maya, about your earlier days at Harvard University and your experience, joining the editorial board, the school paper, the Harvard Crimson. How was that experience, and how did that shape, what you're doing?
Yeah, so that was a real 180 from what I had been doing before. So my first 2 years of college, I was really in the music and the theater scene there. I was in choirs, and I was doing musical theater and trying to do straight theater as well. And I just didn't feel like it was connecting with me in a way that it had in high school and before. So I took a year off, and what I did on that year is that's when I actually went to Italy to study just music very seriously for a year to see if it was really something that I thought I wanted to do. And basically my conclusion, a lot happened to me in that year, but basically my conclusion from that year was, nope, that's not going to happen for me. during that year was also when I rediscovered writing.
Okay.
And so when I came back to Harvard, that was when I decided, okay, if I'm going to do writing, I need to try to really do this and to throw myself into that. So at Harvard, there's this, every extracurricular activity has this process called the comp process. And no one actually really knows what comp stands for anymore. It's an old Harvard tradition of basically hazing the newbies.
Oh, it's not compensation.
Want to join your club.
It's not compensation.
But it's not just hazing. It's you have to sort of fulfill various requirements to prove that you're serious about joining whatever it is. So if you're joining an orchestra, you have to show up to a certain number of rehearsals and play in a certain number of concerts. If you are, you want to join the board of, some sort of advocacy group, you have to show up to a certain number of meetings and perform a certain number of, menial tasks that no one else wants to do and prove that you are passionate about the topic and you're willing to actively contribute to the group.
Okay.
And for, the magazines on campus and for the Crimson, the newspaper, the main newspaper, you have to you have to pick which board of the newspaper you want to be on. So for me, I decided I wanted to be on the editorial board.
Okay.
And you have to show up to a certain number of editorial meetings and write a certain number of articles. And all of this sounds very doable, except you have to layer on top of that the fact that you have all your coursework. You're going to Harvard University. You're trying to plan for your future career. You're trying to have a social life. And you're also, because we're all Harvard students, we all belong to about 5 of these different groups. We don't just belong to one.
Wow.
So,
a lot of juggling
a lot
of the plates.
Fun time management that goes into that as well.
I can imagine.
So joining the editorial board of the Crimson, you basically had to show up to, I think it was like 4 or 6 editorial meetings that month and actively participate in those meetings. So that meant the editorial board is the op-ed pages of the newspaper. So you are the group of people who decides what tact of opinion the newspaper is going to have. And I joined the board at the end of 2009. So this was right after the 2008 elections. So I missed that whole debate that happened in the editorial board room over who the Harvard Crimson was going to endorse for the 2008 elections. But I was told that it was a very testy and long debate that happened around that op-ed that happened. So when I joined, you would come and it was like an hour meeting that was scheduled, but sometimes those would be shorter and sometimes they'd be longer depending on what was being debated that day. And you had to show up and you had to volunteer to write a certain number of op-eds, which I think that was also, between 3 and 6 op-eds per semester.
Now you said an op-ed. Can you explain that? You said an op-ed?
Right, op-ed. So op-ed, if you read a newspaper or the online version thereof, you've probably encountered the opinion pages of the newspaper. Op-ed is OP-ED, which stands for opinion editorial, I believe.
Okay.
And it depends on the newspaper, but on the Crimson, the op-ed is sort of the faceless collective voice of the newspaper. All op-eds are written without a byline. And it's supposed to be the collective agreement, a collective agreed upon opinion that the newspaper is expressing on a certain topic.
Okay.
And there are also specific opinion articles, which I also wrote, which are just one person, and you have like a little picture and your byline is on that opinion piece. And that's just your personal opinion on a certain topic that, you hope that you've researched it well and would be able to defend yourself in a public forum, such as, the internet. And that was just your opinion that the newspaper has chosen to endorse. But an op-ed is everyone getting together to debate a topic, decide on a thesis, and then decide on what are the points that you want to make supporting that thesis. So it's sort of a 5-paragraph essay structure, if you remember that from high school, because op-eds are always necessarily pretty short. I think our limit was always about 600 words, which is really nothing.
Ooh, sounds
but you have to, those 600 words, develop your argument in a convincing way such that someone who doesn't know much about this topic would read this and say, I didn't know this. Let me read this editorial and then maybe look more into it. So that was the comp process for the editorial board. And I found that I really loved it more than I thought I would. I was never a person before who was very inclined to participate in debates of any sort, whether they be political or cultural or social or anything like that. I was always very happy to just sort of listen to each side of the argument. And this forced me to
pick a side.
Pick a side, develop an opinion and defend it. And if I was unable to defend it, then consider the failings of the argument I was trying to defend, or come up with a better reason to defend it. So that was my experience at the Crimson. It was a whole new community that was not at all like the theater community. Because a lot of the theater, I do know people who were in the Harvard theater community who are now very seriously pursuing careers in various aspects of the entertainment industry. But for the most part, at the Crimson, a lot of people there were very serious and had been very serious for a long time about journalism and had been pursuing journalism really since like middle school. Had written for their middle school and high school papers and had done internships at their local news outlets of various sorts.
So you felt like the noob in the room, kind of like just coming in.
100%. I felt like I was really behind, and I was a junior in college at that point. So I felt like I had no chance to pursue this as a career. But as I said, I just sort of threw my hat in the ring with the few credentials that I had, and managed to find myself, writing opportunities and internships and various freelancing opportunities occasionally here and there. And it just kind of kept working out for me. It was less difficult than performing had been, and just as much fun.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a win-win. Sound like.
Exactly.
So, what did it feel like when one of your articles won the award for the Society of Professional Journalists?
Yeah, I still remember getting that email. This is the only journalism award that I've won so far. So I watch this space and see if anything else happens.
One of more to come. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. It's one feather in my cap. So this was for an op-ed, not for an opinion piece that I wrote. But there was I didn't even know that they had done this, but our editorial board leaders at the time had submitted a batch of op-eds to the Society of Professional Journalists as part of this competition. And we won that year. We won sort of best student editorial board or something like that. And one of the op-eds that helped us clinch that prize was one that I had written about the Westboro Baptist Church, which is a name that we all haven't heard in a very long time because we've had other issues to think about. But if we remember who the Westboro Baptist Church is, they are a very extreme right-wing Christian extremists, shall we say, who believe in a very extreme interpretation of the Bible. And they were coming, they were the people at various funerals for soldiers who had died in Iraq or Afghanistan saying, with these big signs that said, like, thank God for dead soldiers, or God hates fags. And they basically believe that all of the ills that have been wrought upon America are because America accepts same-sex marriage. So on this particular day, the Westboro Baptist Church was coming to Harvard to protest outside the Harvard Hillel. And if you don't know what a Hillel is basically the Jewish student union on any given college campuses. And most colleges in America have a Hillel of some sort. Right. And they were coming to protest outside the Harvard Hillel because they still believe that the Jews killed Jesus. Now, this is a very old, extremely dangerous anti-Semitic trope that pops up once in a while in every Jewish person's life. By the way, in case your listeners haven't figured it out, I am Jewish. So the Westboro Baptist Church was coming to Harvard to tell all the Jewish students at Harvard that they were guilty of killing Jesus Christ, which is just absolutely lovely to hear. And the Harvard Crimson decided that they wanted to take a stance on this. Right. So this was a pretty intense debate, I remember. We were going back and forth between, do we basically acknowledge their existence? Do we give them the spotlight by counter-protesting in a way? And if I remember correctly, there were actually some pretty fierce and loud counter protests that did happen that day. Or do we ignore them? Do we deny them the spotlight? Do we pretend they don't exist and thereby try to undercut the hateful message that they're trying to spread?
Right.
And after, I don't even remember how long the debate was. It felt like forever, and it was not a friendly one. We basically settled on the decision of we are going to endorse ignoring them.
Okay.
We are going to endorse not acknowledging the existence of the Westboro Baptist Church on our campus at Harvard University.
Okay.
And I raised my hand and said, I'll write this. I don't know why I did that, but I said, I'll take a stab at this because I feel like this is an issue worth tackling. They are trying to attack my community, and I feel that this is something I need to put myself in front of.
Mm.
So I wrote this, and again, it didn't have my byline on this. I was writing this anonymously as, the Harvard Crimson editorial board. That was the byline that was on it, but it was me who had written it. Okay. And it was the headline of the piece was just ignore them. Those 3 words, just ignore them. And I just talked about, giving these people the spotlight doesn't help anyone. It just amplifies their message and lets it get out there that this is what they believe. And we don't want to be spreading this. So a better option that day would be, take a nice walk by the Charles River, study for your midterm that's coming up, have coffee with a friend, but don't acknowledge them. And yeah, a few months later, I was surprised and gratified to learn that I had been part of this package of op-eds that had won this award from the Society of Professional Journalists. So that felt pretty gratifying.
It's amazing. That's very, harrowing to go through that and to kind of see that you, at the end of the day, standing your ground. And, like the saying goes, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything.
Yeah.
And, sure, that made a bigger statement. That made a bigger statement. Standing your ground, saying nothing, just ignoring, versus, hey, trying to go out and, convince somebody of their entire worldview.
Yeah. There definitely were, I will acknowledge there were very strong arguments for counter-protesting. And like I said, there were people out there who were counter-protesting that day. Mm-hmm. But yeah, my view was I don't want to acknowledge these people. I don't want to give them the satisfaction of them knowing I know they exist. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of my first dip into some sort of activism. I had always been like I said, I'd always been happy to be a little bit more passive up until then.
Right. Well, I'm glad it worked out in one way or another. So
exactly.
Yeah. So what do you do, Maya, to keep your finger on the pulse of your career as far as, in other words, what's your way of staying on the cutting edge of your industry, so to speak? What are the things that you do to stay sharp in your
this is
field?
This is a hard one because journalism is an industry that's gone through a lot of change in the past, 10, 15 years, to put it mildly. Mm-hmm. And the hard thing is no one really can see where it's going, especially in the US where subscriptions are down and no one's spending money on news. Now that's changed a bit in the past year since the Trump administration came into office and people have started seeing the value in independent journalism again, shall I say. But it's difficult because basically no one has any money. And so no one is able to invest in young journalists in the way that they should be invested in, or invest in the sort of innovation and experimentation that needs to be happening. Now, it's still happening just sort of naturally on its own because there are a couple people out there who have the time and resources to futz around with new technology or new ways of presenting stories or multimedia, this, that, and the other thing. So it is still happening, but I will say at Deutsche Welle, there is some of that happening, but it's a very traditionalist model of just, we do the news and we do it this way, and any innovation that's happening is happening in a separate department, and we're not doing that right now. So for me, I have to make sure that I keep my skills sharp in terms of just being able to do mobile reporting, which is sort of one of those buzzwords that's around a lot these days.
I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah, so mobile reporting is basically just you're on your phone and you are using the camera on your phone one way or another to capture something that's happening around you. And there are all sorts of apps out there that help people do this. Of course, the most popular being just Twitter and Facebook, both of whom have live streaming options now. I have done live streaming and video on both of these platforms before. But I just, when there's an event happening around Berlin, I haven't been sent there. I'm not assigned to go cover it, but I'll just go so that I can like take some pictures and tweet some things and try to talk to some people and just keep myself up on my game in terms of having to be light on my feet with on the street reporting. So for instance, yesterday in the US, or at least yesterday as of when we're recording this, there was the March for Our Lives in DC, the big anti-gun, pro-gun control demonstration led by those amazing kids from Parkland. And there was a similar sort of solidarity protest in Berlin, and it wasn't nearly as big, but there were people, and they were at the Brandenburg Gate, and they had signs, and they were chanting, and it was right in front of the U.S. Embassy, so it was a nice sort of demonstration. And again, I hadn't been assigned to cover it. I was, had most of the day off yesterday until I had to go to work in the evening, but I decided to go and check it out and take some pictures and talk to some people. And honestly, people would look at me like, why are you overworking yourself? Why are you doing this? You don't have to do this. And honestly, it's just because I feel like if I don't, then I'm slipping. Right. I need that personal drive in me is telling me you need to go do this or you're not worthy of calling yourself a journalist because you're not doing your job as a journalist, which is letting the world know what's happening.
Yeah, just always staying on the edge. I mean,
exactly.
The Will Smith quote I like, so as you so eloquently put, as long as you stay ready, you never have to get ready.
Exactly. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned.
I always have everyone always has their phones on them, of course, these days. And my phone has, I think, about 50 different news apps on it. And so I'm just always.
That phone's running slow.
Have to be 100% plugged into everything that's happening. News apps in different languages, things that are happening not just in the U.S. but around the world. And that's just what my brain is always on. You just have to know what's happening so that when I go into work for whatever role I'm fulfilling in the newsroom that day, I'm not coming in completely blind going, oh, what's happening? Oh, that happened in that part of the world. Oh, I don't know anything about that, because that's just not acceptable. That puts you behind where you should be from the get-go.
So while we're on the subject of like Facebook Live and then like, mobile reporting, I mean, what are your thoughts on a lot of this fake news? And it seems like I'm getting Facebook messages every other day, or you just see stuff that's just like, everyone's trying to put out their own fake news. What's your thoughts on that?
Dear.
And what do you do to combat that, or what do you feel is how it best should be handled? I know it's kind of left field, but
that's such a tough question. I mean, it gets to a lot of the heart of just what I have to battle as a journalist every day, which is people believing what they want to believe and not listening to the facts of the situation. And a lot of this also connects into, the debates around media bias, which I definitely also have thoughts on, and we can get into that if you want. But in terms of the fake news, I think it's really symptomatic of a population that, I don't want to say uneducated, because it's not uneducated, but just
narcissistic.
Yeah.
I think I said that right.
The way that we get our news these days, there's too many options and there's not enough options. And there's too many options that will simply gratify your point of view as opposed to challenging it. And the point of a journalist is never to, the point of a journalist is never to gratify someone's point of view. It is always to challenge it. And there will always be stories out there that prove, quote unquote, one thing or another. And you always have to take it in an aggregate, and you always have to look at the full story. And the thing these days is no one is ever looking at the full story. You're looking at these little bits and pieces that are flashing at you through whatever screen you're looking at that day. And a lot of stuff is deliberately manipulated depending on what news outlet you're looking at. A lot of it is information that's hard to find, and a lot of it just comes down to knowing your news source and trusting that that news source has a reputation for honesty, has a legacy of honesty, has people behind it that have good intentions, or I shouldn't say good intentions, have people behind it who have journalistically ethical intentions, and educating yourself on the full story. All the information is out there, but it's so important to know where you're getting it. I mean, I've even had friends and family members send me links to, oh, did you hear about this, that, or the other story that happened? And I'll look at it and I'll immediately know, just from looking at the site that it's coming from, that this is fake or manipulated or BS of some sort.
Yeah.
And it is always so hard for me to then turn to that friend or family member and say, this is false. This is not true. This is not the full truth. Like, get your news from somewhere else, for crying out loud.
Because they mean well, but of course they're just getting it, like, you get it from every which way. It's hard to tell, because I get those messages too, and I'm just like, I don't even say anything.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
And if you're not someone like me who's it's very hard. Let me put it this way. Having been in the New York journalism world for a while, it's very hard for people who are in the journalism world to fathom the lives that people who are not in the journalism world live.
Oh, I know. That's just tearing you guys up inside. Just the level of this. Who are you? And look at this going on. And
yes, because we know, or at least to a certain extent, we know what's going on and all of just the stuff that's going down every day of the week. And then we go to family dinners or we go hang out with our friends, and we'll mention something offhand in conversation that if we were in a group of journalists, everyone would immediately be on the same page, and we'll just be met with blank stares of what happened? Who got fired? And you're like, oh my God, okay. Sorry, let me back up like 50 steps and explain to you the story. And at that point, their eyes just glaze over, and you're like, welp, how do I...
No hope with this
one. How do I
one.
make sure that people know what's happening? Because this is actually really important, guys.
Right. Man.
But yeah, it comes down to where you get your news source, and it comes down to how much you care. I mean, are you an apathetic citizen or not? Are you someone who cares about the direction of where the world or where your country or where your community is going or not? And a lot of that will affect where you get your news from. And we've even seen, maybe apathy isn't the right word, because there are definitely people who care a lot but are still getting their news from unreliable sources that then has unfortunate and very detrimental effects in the real world. Honestly, it's a whole new wild west out there that people haven't quite wrapped their heads around, and it's being on the inside of it. It's incredibly frustrating watching the way fake news has permeated the culture in a really indelible way, and it concerns me.
Yeah, really good point. Now, have you ever come across any great ideas that you maybe came across from different industries, whether you may have went to a conference that was in a different field, or you just found little nuggets just through different things you stumbled across that you've been able to implement and apply toward your own trade in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole performance aspect of it, definitely, integrating stuff from
theater,
the entertainment industry into how you present the news. People bash infotainment a lot, and there's a lot to be said about infotainment, but there's a lot to be said about presenting your news in a way that makes people want to engage with it. And we've seen a lot of experiments with this now. I mean, BuzzFeed and Now This Is News and all these outlets out there that are experimenting these sort of short form video, snappy, fast, short-term memory type of news that come up on your news feed and give you a quick hit of something that happened today. I have thoughts about that because I think that those are not the best medium for presenting the whole story to someone. But it's definitely an attractive option. So I think journalism could, there's a lot of integration with the entertainment industry, for better or for worse. I have a lot of friends who work in the startup scene, and what always, what's the word I'm looking for? What always startles me about the startup scene is how sort of fast and flexible a lot of these companies seem to be, simply because they're young and they're small.
So we're talking back in out in Silicon Valley specifically?
Silicon Valley or in New York or even in Berlin. There's a big startup scene in Berlin.
And Texas too, Austin, Dallas.
Yeah, exactly. Just all over the world, really. And it always startles me, like, someone made a decision in this project manager made this decision to, instead of doing this, we're going to do this now. And okay, we're just going to switch and do this now. And in the journalism world, things don't really work like a startup, because there's no, product that you're trying to push. There's no app. It's all just news that is constantly flowing, and you have to continually be curating it and editing and packaging things in an attractive way. But I'm constantly amazed at the, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the quickness with which startups can function and the agility they have in terms of communication, changing tacks if something's not working, pushing something completely innovative and new. And I guess just the innovation aspect of that. And they speak in this jargon that I don't even think is English. I mean, I hear my friends on these conference calls using words that I'm like, is that sentence you said in any way, shape, or form resemble English? Because I don't know what you just said. And they're like, oh yeah, it's just, you got to speak the jargon or else you won't be understood. I'm like, you're not speaking English. What is happening right now? But yeah, the startup scene and the journalism scene, I think, really need to get together more, because people talk about how journalism is a dying industry. And I don't really believe that. I think it's just changing a lot, and people can't really see where it's heading towards. And I think there could be a lot of good synergy. That's a good startup word. There could be a lot of good synergy between
start embracing synergy,
the journalism
versus
and startup world.
Resisting. Okay. Yeah, really good aspect there. Now, how important, Maya, do you feel is the area? We touched on this a bit earlier, on the area of time management. How has your time management changed from your earlier days up until now? And are there any little hacks or strategies you can, recommend to our listeners and how you best manage your time?
I'd say my time management has gotten a lot better now, because I have a much more predictable isn't the word. I have these shifts that I work in, and I go to work and I have those shifts, and I go home and work is over. Unless I want to do work outside, which, often I do. I'm doing research or I'm running to events just to see what's up there. I would say make sure you sleep, because that is an incredibly underrated aspect of life that is very important. Make sure you sleep, and make sure you put down your devices for a certain amount of the day. That's really hard for me as a journalist, because, like I said, I have 3,000 news apps on my phone, and they're constantly buzzing with whatever's happening. And I always just need to, sometimes even in the middle of work, I'll just take a moment, push back from my computer, and do something that's not news related, so that I just sort of capture a semi-state of mental zen and recharge it a little bit, and can then dive back into it. I think that there's nothing wrong with taking small little mental health breaks during the day. I'll do that in between when I'm anchoring. I have these 45-minute or half an hour breaks in between shows, and I'll just, look at silly memes online or plan a vacation, or, do some online shopping, or just chat with my friends, or eat some chocolate, and just, do anything to decompress and make sure that I can then have my full energy back for the next show. Because especially when I do these evening shifts, I'm performing until like 1 a.m.
Wow.
So you gotta do what you gotta do to make sure that you are giving the audience at every single show exactly the best that you possibly can be. So yeah, in terms of time management, I think, if you feel like you need to take a break,
Mm-hmm.
take a break if you're working. Far be it for me to criticize people who procrastinate, because I certainly procrastinate a lot, but just making sure that you doing little mental checks every now and then, scanning yourself to make sure that you are feeling physically well and mentally well, and that if you're feeling anxious or depressed or overwhelmed, that you sort of step back and think, why am I feeling this way?
Mm-hmm.
And then take the 5, 10, 15-minute chunk out of the day to just think about yourself and make sure that you are performing at peak optimization, which I think is another startup term that I've picked up from my friends.
Yeah.
And once you're done with work for the day, put work down.
Oh yeah,
Put down
I've
and
gotten better at that
do
too.
something else, whether it's watching Netflix or going out with friends or just, playing with the cat or the dog or whatever pet that you have.
Hamster.
Reading a book, making sure that you have some time that you're doing that's not work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point. Because I think a lot of that, especially when you touched on the points of make sure you sleep, put down the phone. Do you
Yep.
follow Ariana Huffington much, or are you a fan? Or
I have not been able to follow her recently, but I know she has a whole crusade about making sure
yeah,
that people sleep enough.
mm-hmm.
It's been a thing of hers for a while, hasn't it?
Right, right. Yeah, she actually has a podcast as well. I mean, I listen to it every now and then, but yeah, she's a big advocate on that. Put the phone down. I think she even manufactures. She partnered with a company that makes these little like phone beds. So it's like a little bed, like the
Yeah.
size of a like, a iPhone. You can actually put your
Yeah.
phone in there. So she's like a really big advocate of that. So a lot of those points really hit home because she said what struck me was
Mm.
that no sleep has become the new no smoking, or
Yeah, I
no
I
sleep has become the new
I
smoking.
don't support that at all. I mean, that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
reasons why I had to leave the New York media world. Was
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the things that people did, was they would just brag about how stressed out they were and how little sleep they were
Yeah,
getting.
they wear it as a
Uh,
badge of honor and just like
yeah,
yep.
and I have never understood, like, how are you happy, is how like, how are you happy at all living your life like that? Okay, you love what you do and that's wonderful, but you can't possibly be keeping yourself healthy and mentally fit by working 18 to 20 hours a day every
Mm-hmm.
single day of the week. It was just such a toxic environment, and I'm so glad that Germany has worker protections that stipulate you are not allowed to work that much. You have to, you know, take a break after 8.5 hours.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's that along with the blue lights, in these devices, that's a whole nother topic. But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
man.
the sleep.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, so we're gonna go into the quick lightning round, Maya. Just got a couple quick questions.
All
So,
right.
favorite book or podcast, or favorite books or podcasts
Ooh,
you
favorite
recommend?
books. Well, it's
Hmm?
hard because I've read so many books and I love them so much.
Hmm?
I just finished reading this book called The Taliban Shuffle, which is the memoir of a female war correspondent, which is always badass to hear about,
Hmm?
who spent the early O's, just after 9/11, reporting in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Hmm.
She spent a decade or so there, and it's just absolutely incredible to hear her inside story of what it was like in those countries and what America was doing to those countries.
Okay. Now, any favorite movies? I know we mentioned Netflix and chill, or any like great favorites from back in the day you
Favorite
may have watched that stuck out to you?
favorite movies. Oh
Mm.
man. Well, I mean, I grew up watching Lord of the Rings, so those will always have a special place in my heart, as
Yeah.
well as all the Harry Potter films. So I do love those. Let's see. I remember loving Inception and Interstellar. Those were
Oh
very
yeah.
visually stunning, even though they sort of fall apart if you think about the plot a little bit too hard afterwards.
Yeah.
Um,
I just take a break and say, okay, it's good
Yeah,
enough
it's,
for
it's
me.
all right. Just suspending disbelief. You know what movie I really loved recently? The Martian with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
That was a fun sort of sci-fi romp about a man who gets stuck on Mars after his crew abandons him because they think he's dead.
Hmm.
Also, a very good book. I read the book first. I can also highly recommend the book.
Oh, okay. Great. So yeah, Interstellar and Inception, definitely Mr.
Mhm.
Nolan. Hats off to you as always.
Oh, of
And
course. And of course, the movie that I loved the most in middle and high school was Finding Nemo. I have to give a
oh,
big shout out to Pixar because they make me cry every time. So,
classic. That was
mhm.
ninth grade for us actually.
Yeah, something like that. Oh God, that's so long ago. God, don't remind me.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone, definitely. I had an Android for about a little over a year, and it was the worst technological year of my life. I could not get that thing to work.
Oh, okay, no judgment.
Yeah.
Now, tell me real quick, Maya, what are some of your mentors, living and dead, and why? Whether personal or professional.
Right. So my biggest mentor to date has been a professor who I had in journalism school named Sandy Padway, and he was one of those real old school, tough love, hit the pavement and talk to people on the street type of journalists. He was I watched a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race. He was sort of the Michelle Visage of my life, if that reference makes sense to people listening. Like I said, very tough love, very doesn't take any bullshit excuses, and will not accept you not giving 100% and you not trying your absolute best on every single assignment that he gave you. And it really taught me, I was coming into journalism school with barely any experience. I had just worked on the Crimson and done a couple of internships. And he was the one who really taught me how to interview people, how to talk to people, how to know what sources to think about approaching, how to approach the story in general, how to become a journalist. And I really need to keep up with him more often because he's not dead yet, but he's very old, and I should definitely call him more often, just like I should call my grandma more often.
Yeah, send him a Facebook request. I'm sure
he'll. Yeah, I should.
Yeah. And that kind of popped another question in my head, if you don't mind. What would you say are your thoughts just on the podcasting medium in general? Obviously, it's been growing significantly since the early 2000s. I mean, it's nowhere near taking over radio. But at the same time, there's a lot of whispers about radio, being a dying medium and whatnot. So what are your thoughts on podcasting? Is it too much? Is it saturated? And does it sort of like sometimes undermine journalism as far as what podcasting does?
It's funny because I remember when I was still in school, I went to some journalism conference. I was talking to a guy there who was a professional journalist, and I mentioned to him, what do you think of podcasts? At the time, it was not. There weren't that many podcasts out there that were popular. This was the pre-serial days. So it was sort of still a nerdy thing to be listening to podcasts. And he looked at me and he goes, podcasts are sort of a dying medium. I don't really see them having any more life in them. Wow. And I think about that pretty much every single day when I listen to the 20 podcasts that I'm now subscribed to.
You thought wrong.
I love the medium. I really do. And I think it's sort of become Netflix for radio. What Netflix and TV podcasts have done for radio, because you can take your channel that you want to listen to, whether it be news or entertainment or career advice or comedy or, and you listen to it on your own time whenever you want to.
Yeah, on demand.
You're not required to tune in at a certain time, and if you don't tune in, you miss it. If there are ads, it's fairly easy to skip them. Which not saying that I do that, but it's an option.
Yeah, no more rushing home. It's kind of like I remember just the days of taping your favorite TV show with the VHS tape.
With a VHS tape,
and then your sibling tapes over it, and you're just pissed off,
oh my God, yeah. I was just at a friend's birthday party last night, and it was 90s themed, and she had these old VHS tapes everywhere that she had formed into little cute statues. I was like, oh my God, this is what we're doing with VHS tapes these days. I'm old.
Yeah. I love the 90s, hashtag. So
hashtag love the 90s.
Oh, yeah. So what do you do, Maya, to grow, whether it's spiritually, mentally, health-wise, on a daily basis? Give us some quick sort of things you do or like
quick
to
rundown.
Do.
I drink a lot of wine. No, I'm kidding. I try to do yoga as much as possible. I have a gym that I belong to, and those gym hours are a nice way of focusing on something completely different, which is, the health of my body, which has nothing to do with the news that's going out there in the world for that 1 hour that I'm focusing on the yoga class or the spin class or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I try to have time that I'm talking to my friends every day, and whether it's just sending silly links or silly memes back and forth, and just make sure that I'm properly engaged with my social network in a fun and enjoyable way. Because the journalism industry that gets you down, you're exposed to a lot of horrible things that are happening all over the world just on an hour-to-hour basis, much less a daily basis. So just to make sure that I do something every day that makes me happy and do that very sincerely. And yeah, just make sure I have that time for myself.
Okay. And did you ever find yourself struggling, comparing yourself to other people's success?
Oh my God, all the time, all the damn time. This is something that I struggle with a lot. Having gone to the schools that I went to, I was in a cohort and classes and friends with people who have reached amazing heights already in their careers. People who are comedy writers or have won major awards or have been published in some incredible places or are working for international broadcasters in the US or have their own TV shows already. And it's because I went to school with these people, it's hard for me to look at that and not think of myself as having failed a little bit because I'm not also there. And so I really have to remind myself on a daily basis, you have your own path. Like, it's okay. Not everyone is going to end up this place. Not everyone is going to end up in that place. Not everyone is going to end up with, the Pulitzer or the Tony Award or the head writer on a TV show thing. And that's okay. You got to sort of look at yourself and make sure that you are satisfied with what you're doing right now and that you have a goal that's attainable and you're working towards it. And I think as long as you have that, you should be able to maintain your own sort of inner sense of satisfaction and knowing that you are accomplishing something and that you're not a failure just because you haven't had that stroke of luck of landing this TV show or landing that writing position or landing a job at that newspaper.
Okay. Now, what were some of your biggest setbacks you feel or failures, and how did you overcome and learn from?
I've been pretty fortunate in my career, but I will say that, so right out of journalism school, I had this internship at an outlet that has now been shut down very unceremoniously, and I've thoughts about that, but we won't get into that. An outlet that was called DNA Info, and it was in New York and Chicago, and it was a hyper-local news reporting site. And I got an internship there, and it was very much in the vein of what I had been doing at Columbia, which was very pounding the sidewalk, doing very local news stories about car crashes and fires and local color and local organizations and just really on-the-ground reporting, which is something that's really lacking in the U.S. right now. There are not enough local outlets covering what's happening in people's towns. So I had that internship, and I basically knew that if I wanted to stay at this outlet, which I sort of did, they weren't ever going to be able to offer me a full-time position in the way that I wanted, but I would be able to freelance for them. And they would, probably take my freelance pieces for as long as I didn't massively screw up. And I decided that I didn't want to freelance and I wanted a full-time job. And I went and I got myself a full-time job at another outlet. And on the first day of that new job, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. And I knew that I was not going to enjoy that job and that I should have stuck with DNA Info and just stuck it out as a freelancer. And I was somewhat right because a year later, they fired me. Well, they didn't fire me. They let me go. Partly because, at least I think, partly because I was due for a raise because I had been there for a year and they didn't want to give me the raise. For no good reason. They just didn't want to give me the raise. So, at least this is in my mind. So they let me go. And then I was sort of out there in the universe without a job. And that was when I started freelancing for the paper in Israel because I knew that they were looking for someone in New York. And so that's worked out somewhat, but that was... I often think about what would have happened if I had not taken that job at that full-time job and had stuck with DNA Info for a while instead and been doing sort of less glamorous work, but it would have been probably a lot more rewarding, a lot more fun, even if it wasn't very well paid.
Hmm. Well, like they always say, everything happens for a reason, and
Mm.
what led you to what led to that path there also led to the freelancing for the Israel paper, and but yeah,
Yeah,
we've all had those setbacks and different things, and it's just all about how do we respond to it and how we use that as an advantage to pivot. So
yeah, it's I can definitely draw a very
mhm.
I can definitely draw a good line from that full-time job that I took after DNA Info to where I am now, because I had this editor who told me about this opportunity, and I took that opportunity, and then that led me here, and et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm living in Germany working as an international news anchor. So, I don't necessarily believe that things happen for a reason, but you sort of look back and you can see how all the puzzle pieces fit
Right.
together in a nice wrapped up way.
Yeah, the puzzles is a good is a good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is there anything, Maya, that still makes you uncomfortable today, and is that a good thing as far as getting out your comfort zone?
You mean in terms of my work what I do as a journalist?
Right, right. Rather personally, professionally.
Right.
Hmm.
Um, I still really hate doing man on the street interviews. We call them vox pops, which is where, if you ever watched a news report, there's almost
Hmm.
always a segment where you see sort of random anonymous people with a microphone in front of their face very
Hmm.
quickly expressing their opinion about something that's happened, and you see like four or five of them in a row.
Right.
Um, Everyone hates doing those. It's incredibly nerve-wracking to be out on the street with a notebook and a pencil, or even worse,
Hmm.
with a camera and a microphone, and be stopping random people who are just going about their day, rushing around somewhere, and asking them, hey, so give us your opinion on this thing that you might not know anything about. And let me shove a
Because they're a
camera in your
world, because
face
they
and a
must be,
microphone in your face while you're doing
yeah,
it.
because they must be a world expert in in that
Exactly.
subject.
Everyone hates doing this. And it's just one of those skills that
Yeah.
you have to become really good. You have to be good at chatting up strangers,
Hmm.
and that's a very essential skill as a journalist, is being able to call
Mm.
people. I know that our generation hates talking on the phone,
Mm.
but cold calling people who don't know you and who you
Mm.
don't know and ask them for something.
Mm.
Um, Stopping people on the street to ask them for things, and asking them not just, oh, hey, how's your day going? Asking them, pretty intense, somewhat personal questions about their opinions or their lives. It's a hard skill to master, and it's something that I still struggle with.
Yeah, yeah, especially when you mentioned like the cold calling, because even in the field I work in finance, yeah, a lot of that is cold calling, and
Oh yeah.
so it's just, yeah, it's like the same sort of deal. It's a transferable skill of sales, really, and
Hmm.
influence, and be able to use that to market and influence, and get what you
It's an
need.
important skill for anything, the ability
Yeah,
to use a phone and sound professional and convincing and get the person to talk to you and engage with you.
yeah, very, very, yeah, very hit home right there.
Yeah.
Now, what's one thing you feel like you're always looking to improve upon, or feel you could do better?
Mm. Well, like I just said, talking to strangers is something I
Mm-hmm.
definitely need to improve upon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say in an office environment, I need to get better, or just sort of in a professional environment. I can always be better at advocating for myself. We all have career goals and we all have aspirations, and there's a lot of people who are there to help you if you
Mm-hmm.
ask them. But there's also a lot of politics in whatever office you're in that you have to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and learning how to advocate for yourself doing it in a polite and professional but very firm way is something that I can definitely improve upon, that I need to work on, and that is really an important life skill if you ever want your career to go anywhere and you don't want to just sort of stall out as a mid-level something or other, always reaching towards those stars thinking, oh, but one day I'll get there, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you will get there if you learn to approach the right people and talk to them the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's just really the fear of self promotion, I think, is what holds most people back. It's actually a book I read recently called The Psychology of Sales Call Reluctance, and
Mm,
it's based on, they wrote this book, like they started doing these studies back in the 70s, but they finally put the book together in like the late 90s, early 2000s. The author's escaping me, but that book I'm sure is on Amazon, and it applies to all different industries. Just sales call reluctance, and how that stems from just self-promotion. People want to stay small and not really self-promote and, get what they want, or ask the right
Yeah.
person, what do I need, or what I need to do, to get where I need to go. So it's a really
Fear
good
of
point.
failure and fear of success at the same time.
Yep. Yep. Really, really right on point.
Yeah.
So looking back, Maya, would you change a thing? If so, why? If not, why?
Hmm. Well, like we said, I can draw a pretty convincing line from certain choices I made in my life to where I am now, and I'm very happy where I am now. But I think
Mm-hmm.
if I could change one thing, I think I would have majored in something different in college, because I majored in psychology
Mm-hmm.
with the minor in Italian, and I don't even remember why I picked psychology. I think it was because it was just a subject in high school that I really enjoyed and was pretty good at.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really, looking back, I should have done something like history or international relations or government or social studies or something like that, because that's much more of what I do now. And I have an expertise in that, I've built up through the years of my career, but I don't have, the degree to show someone to say, hey, I'm actually really well educated in this topic. You should take me seriously, which hasn't been too much of a detriment yet, but I could see how in many cases it might be. And I enjoyed studying psychology. I learned a lot. It was really fun. I worked in a lab. It does apply. Psychology does apply in many
Mm-hmm.
ways to what I do now, but there are other topics that are now a little bit more pertinent to what I do with my life. So maybe I would have majored in something different, and maybe I would have started doing journalism much earlier in college. It would have been nice to have all 4 years at the Crimson instead of just two.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah, looking back, it's like I said, you went from psychology to journalism, so there's a lot of journalism professionals can't say that, and you can obviously use that background to an advantage in some ways, as far as how psychology could apply toward journalism
Oh,
versus
absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
journalism is one of those very broad industries where you can make almost anything apply to it. So psychology wasn't a bad choice in the end. I just feel like with me doing a lot of political reporting now, there would have been something more pertinent. But hey, I was, 18 when I picked things. So what did I know?
Right. So what's as we start wrapping up here, what's it looking like? What are some goals you're looking to pursue over the next 3-5 years out? What's like
Yeah.
a good mission that you're tied to doing, over the long
Yeah,
term?
well, my pie in the sky, the moon that I'm shooting for is I'd love to have my own TV show one day. Maybe not necessarily about politics, but I want to talk about issues that affect people in their day-to-day life, especially health issues. I find myself really drawn to health and technology and the
Mm-hmm.
intersection thereof. But I've been putting that out there into the universe a little bit,
Okay.
and sort of my overall career goal. 3 to 5 years out, I think I'd like to start establishing myself going that direction. Right now, I feel like I'm on the right track, although things are kind of happening a little bit more slowly than I
Mm-hmm.
would like. So I'm planning some conversations with some people to see if I can speed that up. Speaking of
Nice.
advocating for yourself.
Okay. And are there any like I don't know, upcoming events or initiatives down the pipeline you want people out there to know about? 'Cause I know
Mm.
you're a big advocate on
Well,
health and
you can
technology and that sort of
always
thing.
tune in to DW News. We actually have a 24-hour live stream on our website at dwnews.com. So you can get your international news through us if you're sick of just hearing about the American news all the time.
And what's the website
I
again?
am going to be actually coming up this Friday. So, Hayward, I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out, but
Mm-hmm.
when is it? On Friday the 30th, I am going to be hosting DW's flagship daily show called The Day,
Okay.
which is on, I believe, at 9:30 p.m. our time, so 3:30 p.m. East Coast time in the U.S. So if this comes out before then and anyone wants to tune in and watch me, I will be hosting the big DW show.
All right. Yeah, we'll try and see. Depending on the what we're able to put out, we'll see if we can
Yeah.
try and get it out before then. Keep our fingers
No
crossed.
pressure at all.
And the website's dwnews.com.
dwnews.com.
Okay. All
And
right.
it's available in 30 different languages as well, if English is not your first language.
And are you guys like on the Facebook, Twitter, all that
We are
stuff,
on the
social
Facebook.
media?
We're on the Twitter. I believe it's just DW News or at DW News on all of those outlets. I personally on Twitter, I am at Maya Ergas. That's my middle name. So that's MayaErgas. And on Instagram, if you really want to see all my absolutely hilarious Instagram stories, I am Cinco de Maya.
Like what you did
Like
there.
Cinco de Mayo, but Cinco de Maya on
Yeah.
Instagram.
Look at that. All right. Love it. Love it. So, all right, we're gonna wrap it up here, Maya. It's been a great show. Just one last question. I just want you to talk about a little bit of what you think legacy means to you, how you want your legacy to be remembered, and what are like maybe 3 key lessons or takeaways that our listeners listening can take away from you as far as, whether they're aspiring journalists or broadcasters or just someone in general, your average Joe. What are like, just tell us a little bit about legacy and like maybe 3 key takeaways for today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Of course, I have the Lin-Manuel Miranda line in my head. Legacy is it's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see.
I love that one.
Which is just one of those lines as a writer. You're like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? Legacy. What would I like my legacy to be? I would like to think that I bettered people's lives through the information that they got from me, whether it be just better informing them what's going on in the world, or, they learned something about the way they're living their lives or the way people around them are living their lives. I just want people to feel like they're better citizens for having engaged with the work that I'm doing, and that they are better equipped to navigate the world and our government and our democracy and traveling around the world through the work that I've done. 3 key takeaways. Well, if you're a journalist, get your social media up to snuff, especially if you're living in New York, because that's what it's all about there. That's sort of the short and dirty. And honestly, if you're a journalist, the biggest thing I can say to you is don't be a dick. It is a very small world out there. People know each other. They talk. If you were an ass to someone, everyone's going to know about it very quickly. Always treat your colleagues with respect, no matter how you feel about them. And I think that's pretty much applicable across industries. I mean, I know we all fantasize about doing a cinematic moment when we quit a job, just burning all the bridges and walking out of the office, but you really cannot do that because you never know who's going to be that person who, come 20 years down the road, you need a job and you need a reference, or you need help, or you need a connection, and oh, look, this person who you cussed out as you were leaving the office, or who you blocked on social media because you held a grudge against them, they're going to be the person who you suddenly have to go, hey, what's up? Can you help me? Yeah, so you don't ever want to be in that position.
That awkward moment.
That's very awkward. And then I would say, just for everyone, read more books. Honestly, like reading books is one of the things that I do to try to still keep myself mentally interested, but disconnect a little bit from the news cycle. And I should be better about this. I have about 3 books I'm trying to work my way through right now, but they really open your mind, and they give you new perspectives on the world, whether it be fiction or nonfiction or fantasy or sci-fi or whatever you want to do. They're just such a good way to better yourself and to entertain yourself and to feel like you are, what's the word I'm looking for? Enlightened, and to feel like to enlighten yourself.
Man, that's that's it right there. That's I have nothing else more to say, and I can't, I'm not gonna top that. So.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
One more thing to plug. Can I plug one more thing?
Oh yeah, go right ahead. Yep.
So later in this year, I think, I'm going to be published in a book of essays that is coming out called A Place They Called Home. And it's all essays that were written by people like me who reclaimed German citizenship after the Holocaust. Okay. So I have both of my grandparents on my mother's side were Holocaust survivors. And this whole book is a collection of essays from people who were either survivors themselves or first or second generation after that, who were eligible for German citizenship because of the atrocities. And so I have an essay that's coming out in that book. So when it hits shelves, you should pick it up.
Oh, definitely. So I guess we'll just our listeners can just stay tuned to your social media, Twitter, Instagram for updates.
Oh yeah, I will be blasting all over the social media when that book comes.
And that'll
out.
be later
Don't
in the
worry.
summer.
Sorry.
That'll be later in the summer.
I think we're aiming for the fall.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be late this year is when it's supposed to come out.
Okay, great. Thanks for the update. So,
yeah, of course.
Maya, thank you for being our next
Thank
guest,
you.
our third guest of season 2 of the Career Pulse podcast. This was amazing.
This was great. Thank you so much, Hayward. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was a great way to reconnect. And I remember us connecting at the high school reunion. You were telling me about your
that
background.
reunion.
And
I felt so old.
we were.
Like, I remember you. I remember you. Holy cow. Who are all these people?
But it's just great to see the path you're heading at and where you've done and where you're going. So this was very insightful. I learned a lot as well.
Oh, thank you. I hope that this is useful for someone out there.
Definitely, most definitely. So I will catch you next time I see you. If I am ever in Europe or Germany, I'll know who to call.
Yeah, next time I'm in Detroit, I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All right, there you have it. The one and only Maya Shwayder of DW News. Great interview. Great guest to have on the podcast. Once again, a lot of great takeaways just from her working in this field. I mean, a lot of key takeaways. She mentioned, just ignore them. It was based off of her award-winning article. A lot of stuff she mentioned in our show. The hard thing is that no one knows where her industry is going when it comes to journalism and how you're dealing with fake news and where things are going. I just love the fact that she just had a lot of great takeaways, especially when she was talking about podcasts. It's like the new Netflix for radio. She mentioned about just a lot of just certain things about mental toughness. Not only mental toughness, but just, showing how people out there need to, get better at advocating for themselves. People are always there to help you if you ask for it. And, just once again, some takeaways. She mentioned about she has a publication coming up in the fall, as well as, a lot of updates she's doing with the news. So it was just very exciting podcast. I learned a whole lot. And, it's just the fact of, we never quite know what path we're headed. And, everything, seems to happen for a reason. So I'm just really excited about having her on. Great interview. So once again, guys, this was your third episode of season 2 of the Career Pulse podcast, your vital sign for career and business from everyday go-getters like you. My name is Hayward Crawford, your host, and I'll catch you next time.